Cybersecurity isn't an exact science. It's where art and science meet, informed by experience and tested in battle and reimagined to tackle evolving adversaries. My name's Josh Davis, and I'm joined by my co-host Tyler Reguly. And in this podcast, we focus on the art of security, whether that's on the cutting edge of AI, 0 days, or emerging threats, to evaluating whether established security concepts can still serve us in the modern era, which is kind of what today's topic is about. So today we're going to be looking at cyber hygiene, cybersecurity hygiene, and what we think the basics are of it and how they can serve us today. This is an older concept, been around since they're solidified in the 2010s, but is really lent from basic hygiene, hospitals and personal hygiene, washing your hands and wiping your nose so that you don't get diseases or spread them around, or taking precautionary measures like wearing gloves and aprons in a hospital. The idea is that there are lots of little things you can do on a regular basis that are going to stop something way, way worse down the line hitting you. So when it comes to cybersecurity, the same principle applies, but it's what are the basic things organizations can do on a regular basis that are going to make sure they don't have to face any or maybe as big cybersecurity incidents and breaches down the line. So hope that's a good starting point. Tyler, welcome. And maybe you can kick us off by explaining to us what you think of when you think of basics for our starting point.
Sure. And I think the answer is simple and straightforward. I'm going to go so far as to say cannot be argued, just to make sure that you fail when you try to argue me later. But I think that it comes down to a couple of things. I think that cybersecurity is about stacking and layering your defenses. And that base layer is what we're talking about when we're talking about cyber hygiene. And to me, it falls down to, I usually say two things, but one of them is really split into two things itself. So I'm going to talk about all three individually. And that comes down to vulnerability management, secure configuration management, and integrity monitoring. And I'm not going to say, go ahead.
Before you jump into those, so these are cyber hygiene is the basics, but we're looking at the basics of the basics. What's the most fundamental components of cyber hygiene, the foundational pieces to build upon?
Yeah, if you were to think about this as Legos, which at this point, Lego sets are way too complex for me. When I think of Legos, I think to when I was a kid and you just had different colored bricks and you just stacked them up to make simple houses. That was basically what you did with Legos, right? And so if you think about that concept of taking that giant green tile and then stacking all of your bricks on top of it to build your walls, we're talking about that green tile right now. We're talking about that base platform that supports everything else, the glue that holds it all together.
Well, I like that as an analogy, but they are just basic houses. Where's your imagination? But going back to the foundation, I think where we're going to have the debate is whether I think your foundational tile, the Lego platform, is thick enough to house a strong Lego structure on top of it, or a strong enough security platform. So let's go from there. Take us in those three components and why you think, why you're putting forward those arguments, so I can prepare my response.
So we start with vulnerability management, and unfortunately today, vulnerability management is to some a bad word and to others an overloaded term. When I talk about vulnerability management, I talk about managing the vulnerabilities that exist on your assets. I talk about, we're talking about your Windows vulnerabilities, your web server vulnerabilities, those types of things. I don't want to get into the more complex versions of vulnerability management, the things like library management for development teams, for example. I feel that is a different level that exists outside of the basics, because not everybody has a development team. Not everybody has to worry about library management, but everybody has to worry about basic vulnerability management of their assets. So I think that's number one. Number two, secure configuration management. This is making sure that the standards, the benchmarks, the policies, we are an industry with too many terms to describe the same things. But this is making sure whichever of those words you prefer are applied to your host. So if you are a shop that says we're going to adhere to CIS policies, if you are a shop that says we're going to adhere to PCI or is mandated to adhere to PCI, making sure that those standards are applied to your systems and everything is configured properly. That is a very basic line of defense, making sure that your systems are hardened, right? A word we use all the time in the industry. And SCM, Secure Configuration Management, is what makes sure that happens. Finally, integrity management, which for years has been known as file integrity management or FIM. I despise the fact that we limit it by putting that F on there. Integrity management is so much more when you talk about a system than just the files on it. And so integrity management, I think, is another key piece of making sure that your system is hardened, secure, and it's really your first line of reactive security. So I see secure configuration management as being very proactive, making sure you're hardened in advance. Vulnerability management should be proactive. It isn't always, because you have to know the vulnerability exists in order to find the vulnerability and resolve it. But for the most part, it's proactive as well. Integrity monitoring is very reactive. It's that first line of defense when something goes wrong to know that something has gone wrong. It's your smoke detector, your carbon monoxide detector. It's that sort of defense in your home.
So I want to ask a few questions to understand your what you're proposing as the foundational basics of cyber hygiene here. But I think we're probably the way we are in agreement is that these are still, even though this is a dated concept, started in the early 2000s, and a lot can change in a week or a month in this industry. This is still valuable as a concept, right? The cyber hygienes and the pieces that we're discussing today in today's world. Yeah. Okay. So configuration management. This is one I'd like you to kind of codify exactly what that means, because it's just such a configuration of what, how far does that go in your basics? Is it limited to hosts? Or does it also go to kind of users, identity access and management and so on?
To me, configuration management is, again, to steal the word I just used, in the VM space, it's about your assets. Everything at that base layer is about your assets, because at the end of the day, users may come and go. They may be active or inactive. You may have different software packages running on top of things, but at that very baseline, your assets rarely change. You're going to buy your networking gear. You're going to have it for years. You're going to, your desktop replacement cycle might be 3, 4, 5 years. That desktop is going to exist for a while. I mean, let's be honest. I'm sure we've all heard the horror stories of organizations that are still running Windows XP and Windows 7, even though they're end of life. Server 2008 or Server 2003, hopefully not, but I have heard stories about it. And that means that those assets have been around for a very long time. And so to me, when you talk about secure configuration management, you're talking about the configuration of the assets.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And assets is you can loosely define that as host, right? So some people think everything's an asset these days. A digital asset could be anything.
It can be anything. I'm talking, and arguably that when I started in this industry, we used the term host. Uh-huh. And that was what we meant. Anything, anything that could be assigned an IP address.
That was
for example.
Another way I was thinking of it. Yeah.
That's sort of the definition of it in my mind.
Okay, cool. And I'm going to leave vulnerability management alone. I think I fully agree with that. I'm not going to try I'm not going to dig any deeper on that one. But the integrity management. So this was a little bit of a curveball for me, kind of how you'd listed it. I think I wasn't expecting this. We try to go to these as blind as possible, so it's good debate. But that's the first smoke detector, the first line of defense that's going to let you know that something wrong, right? Could you maybe elaborate a little bit more on that? And then it's my turn.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think there's I hate to do this, but I'm going to say there's a great case study that has been published by a vendor that I will not name, that says how the product ruined their night and saved their year. And I think that's a great way of looking at it. And it was because an alert went off that a file that they were monitoring had changed in the middle of the night. That alert triggered all the alarms that they needed to realize that, yes, they were in the middle of an attack and they were able to step in and stop it. Okay, I'm going to have to go there because I can't not use this word. It is a tripwire. right? It is that first indicator that someone has come in, that they have tripped that wire. There's a reason why that product is named what it is named. Um, and but it doesn't matter what integrity monitoring or file integrity monitoring system you're talking about. They do something important, which is they alert you when the configuration of your system or the integrity of your system has changed. And so some of the things that like my research team has been talking about lately is, if you read Reddit or follow any of the blogs, there's tons of conversations about EDR evasion. And there's a reason why I didn't say that EDR is a part of basic cyber hygiene. There's many reasons why I don't think EDR is part of basic cyber
The
hygiene.
CIS would disagree. They have malware defenses in their list.
There are other ways to defend against malware, but yes. So, for example, one of the things that you can do if you have integrity monitoring is you can monitor, for example, one of the techniques for EDR evasion is to go below the Windows firewall, go down to the lower level APIs, and start to block network connections and block applications. So you can do actual filtering of this binary is not allowed network access. And that's one of the techniques that you'll often see talked about, is to go in and say the binary for the EDR is not allowed network access. Well, that's, maybe you've got heartbeat reporting and you're going to get an alert triggered. Maybe you just think the host has gone offline, though. With integrity monitoring, exactly. With integrity monitoring, you can monitor your EDRs to see if they've been added. Now, the argument could be made, which I'm sure you would make right now, but I'm going to prevent you from doing that by making it myself. What happens if somebody puts in that kind of alerting or that kind of block on your agent for your integrity monitoring? That is a concern you could have. Nobody has thought of that yet. If you ever look at the list of EDR evasion techniques that are out there, they have all the known EDR brands. They never have any of the integrity monitoring solutions. So maybe we've given them that idea with this podcast. I'm sorry if we have, to all of the defenders out there. But I think the real thing is that with integrity monitoring, you can have those heartbeats, you can have those alerts, and you can have them set to inform you that, yes, this system has gone offline unexpectedly. I kind of think of the Windows Server shutdown screen. And on a Windows 10, Windows 11, you shut it down and that's it. You hit the shutdown button. But on Server 2022, Server 2025, you hit shutdown and you have the cause and reason why, planned or unplanned. So I think you can have some alerting built into that will safely help you.
Okay. So I enjoyed that last bit. It actually wasn't where my argument was going to be, but I'm going to loosely apply the security through obscurity by having an odd defense, like or a less well-known defense, because they do go after the most common piece things they're going to come against, because most of the attacks are going to scale. But actually, the argument that I was going to make was we're talking basics here, and you started talking about the value of integrity monitoring as failbacks for other solutions that you hadn't, like EDR, that you hadn't put in the basics. So let's not unpick that one, because I think we've got enough to discuss. But
are you sure? Because I'm happy to. I have an answer for that.
Well, let me just put this one forward first, and maybe we'll go back there, because I think you throw a little bit of curveball for me, because I thought we were going to have a kind of argument of hygiene versus resilience, and I was going to say that even though hygiene is an older term, I think that the way resilience is talked about these days is maybe the newer here term, not to replace it, but I think something to be part of it, to not only withstand the attacks, which for me is what a lot of secure configuration management and vulnerability management is focused on. I know they're not blocking technologies, but they prevent stuff by reducing your attack surface. But then you went into integrity monitoring in the way of using it as a sort of tripwire, as you said, to let you know when something is going on. So I'm actually going to have to pick the battle on which parts I think are most important for that resilience, that detecting an attack after, or compromise after it's happened, and then containing and responding to it before anything truly, let's say, newsworthy happens to you in your organization. But yeah, you got a quick response to that while I prep my next points?
I I question if you had a question or a statement there. But yeah, I think so why throw it in? And so in all fairness, I knew you were going the resilience route because you told me that in advance. Um, and I wanted to make it more difficult for you. I thought it would be more fun. I'm not going to lie. I wanted to make things a little more interesting. But I think that when we think about, basic hygiene, when we think about, hygiene of our homes, you talk about cleaning up, right? You don't leave dirty dishes sitting out. You could almost think of that like vulnerability management. Old, crusty dishes are the same as those older pieces of software that are sitting out there with vulnerabilities in it. We do things like install locks on our doors and even our windows. I can still remember my grandmother with her sliding door with that stick of wood that she would put in the sliding glass door so that it couldn't be opened if the lock on it failed. To me, those things are hardening your home, the same as secure configuration management does. And the last step in protecting ourselves is smoke detectors, carbon monoxide detectors in the home, and that's integrity monitoring. So to me, the basics of cybersecurity are no different than the basics that we take around our home to keep it a safe and clean environment.
And I think in earlier episodes, we talked about whether things are security is science or art. And I think the fact that we can compare it to so many real life scenarios kind of shows the artistic side of security. But yeah, this is a slight curveball, but not something I'm not prepared for, because I think the analogy that I would like to use is that, yes, those kind of dishwashing, go back to hospital hand washing kind of precautions are necessary to stop the viruses, but I think the viruses have gotten worse. And I don't mean compute the virus. I mean, the enemy, the thing we're trying to stop, the disease or the flies or whatever it is that you're trying to stop by being hygienic, is actually a lot bigger than before. And that requires more comprehensive basic hygiene measures to be included. So that would be my argument for resilience. The analogy here is that the virus is hospitals changed their practices when COVID-19 came along, right? They were rapidly contain that, shut it down, and try and limit the spread as much as possible, wear a lot more protective gear. And I think that's a similar analogy for what we face these days in the threat actor sphere, whether it's kind of geopolitical breakdown in track, taking these people down and actually through attribution, or whether it's just them being able to reinvest ill-gotten gains and specialize. They've gotten more challenging. They've gotten more powerful. The virus has gotten bigger. So I think resilience is essential now, and I don't think integrity monitoring is the basic that I would put forward for making sure that you had that. I do think it captures the monitoring bucket, which I'm a huge advocate for. But I think that if I was to recommend to an organization kind of starting out, I wouldn't send them out to go and buy an integrity monitoring solution. I would tell them to download some sort of log repository, Security Onions, an open source sim that I think is a great starting point to see how it goes before you maybe make an investment into DIY or with a managed service like that. But Windows logging is really easy. Turn it on. Make sure that you enable command line logging on your PowerShell. You're going to see the type of attacks that EDRs look for as well. And then you can forward those off to Security Onion, wherever you need to, so that you have all of the pieces of the puzzle. I'd argue more pieces of the puzzle to make that assessment than integrity monitoring would be. Admittedly, the flaw in my argument is you'd have to set up those alerts. Whereas if you buy a solution like integrity monitoring, it is going to just trigger for you. But on the monitoring side, I think that'd be where I'd want to start and build from.
So, you've actually already presented the start of my argument, which is that you have to set it up. If we talk about basic entry level stuff, you want as little setup and as little configuration as you need to be up and running. Let's think about it. For example, a smoke detector, you pop in a battery, you stick it to the ceiling. It's done. It's working. You don't have to do anything else. When you start to talk about SIMs and log monitoring, now you need people to pay attention to those, to review those, to write alerts against those. When you talk about integrity monitoring, you are getting a fully packaged solution that a vendor is thinking about all of the components that need to be monitored for you. You're not writing your rules for integrity monitoring. You're not telling it what to look for. You're not thinking of what log sources do I need to include to correlate this data. You're getting a completely enclosed tool that is an all-in-one that just out of the box accomplishes those tasks for you. And I think there's a big difference there. Log monitoring has its place, and it's probably level 2 of building that Lego house. It's probably those first bricks that you put into the foundation of the walls, but it's not the ground that you build on, because there's too many additional steps, and any one of those steps are too easy to overlook, miss, or confuse. I think it's a great technology. It's a great technique. It's not a basic. And to go to your example about hospitals changing their policies, when COVID-19 hit, they did, but they didn't throw out the basics. People didn't stop washing their hands because they added additional layers of protection. So keeping those basic layers as simple and as easy, something that everyone can do, something you don't have to be trained on. You don't need a SOC analyst to go and look at your logs. You don't need a specialist to look at it. You need to understand that, hey, I bought this tool and the experts building this tool said this is a concern. And that, to me, is the important part of it.
Okay, but in this scenario, we're almost assuming, well, one, we're assuming that they've got the money to go and buy a tool. Two, we're assuming that they don't have any of the kind of security expertise or extra humans to kind of do some of this work. So what happens when the smoke alarm goes off? Where everyone panics, runs around? There's still going to be that kind of, if you don't have the logs in place to kind of cross-reference those things against, you might not have an entire piece of the puzzle to know exactly what happened. Even if you were to go to the said vendor who wrote the alert, sometimes the recommendation is check your logs for this, or check for Y. So I think that it kind of, the reason I say log monitoring is essential, and I think maybe let's just call it log collection if we want to see what the really foundation is rather than the monitoring bits, and that moves out the kind of alerts. But having something to refer back to when something feels wrong, it allows you to kind of reverse engineer what happened and then kind of surgically address that hole. Otherwise, everything goes wrong, the alarm goes off, you don't know what to do. So maybe let's say you burn everything, you reimage your soft or your hardware, you have a completely new environment. It's running the same stuff that was running before, and maybe you just patch harder, but you don't know what the real root cause of that was to support. Well, if you to come out of that as a more resilient organization, as a more hygienic organization, you are maybe doomed to repeat the mistakes of continuous reinfection to go back to the hospital.
So you touched on a lot of things. I want to touch on as many of them as I can remember. You started with what if people can't afford the tooling? I don't think penny pinching is an excuse for not having proper cybersecurity. I also don't think that open source is always a solution to not having budget, because open source can be significantly more expensive when you consider the learning curve that comes with a lot of it, and the fact that often you get the software for free, but the support is ridiculously expensive to use that software, or there is no support and you have to go out and learn how to use that software, which takes time and resources. Assuming that there's no security knowledge, I think when we talk about enterprises, of course there's a security team, but when you talk about a lot of SMBs, it's one IT person. That's it. When they have any sort of security issue and they need to dig into something, they're bringing in consultants anyways. They're going to go to an outside firm and say, we had an incident. We need you to help with this. Even the big enterprises, a lot of them will go out to like the large consultancy firms and bring them in to run those investigations. Now, does that mean that log collection is not important? No, not at all. It's still a very important aspect, and I'm fully agreeing with you on that. But when a fire starts, your concern isn't why did the fire start? Your concern is how do I put out the fire? So if you've got a pot on the stove and suddenly there's a fire around that pot, you're not looking to say, did a piece of paper fall in there? Did grease splatter? Did anything like that happen? And I'll throw this out there because I know the word. When I say stove, I mean hob. Just to qualify stove that. And so, you're thinking about, how do I put this out? Where's the lid to put on top of the pot? Where's the fire extinguisher to put it out? When you have a fire, your initial reaction is putting out that fire. It's not determining the source of the fire. That's after the fact investigation.
Yeah. These are some artful analogies, and so I think, do you know what, I'm going to concede because I'm happy that we are doing some sort of monitoring in the basics. I was not happy when I thought you might not bring any of them, and so I'm going to fight my final battle before maybe we see if we have any sort of conclusion or agreement. But it kind of goes back to, there's a reason I asked you if security configuration management included things around identity, because I do think in the modern era, hybrid environments, most of your work is done remotely. You're kind of logging into things constantly, and I hate to say it, but people say identity is the new perimeter, right? There's always a new perimeter, but I do think it's an important one. And I think if you were to go along with talking about basics, things you can kind of do early on, and make sure you pick up those habits to keep on doing them, then limiting your the privileges, so using privileged access management, and making sure that your passwords are strong and your MFA is also there, is actually going to save you a lot of headaches. Because let's go back to the integrity monitoring example. You don't need to trip those wires if you have a login. Sometimes you can kind of do what you need to do depending on the objective, looking and smelling exactly like a legitimate user. So that would be my final submission for the basics.
So I would argue that depending on which framework it is that you're adhering to when you do your security configuration management, if we take CIS policies, they include minimum password lengths, minimum password complexity, password rotation. We can argue whether or not that is still viable in today's environment and whether or not it makes sense. They define things like making sure things are least privileged, like you have limitations on who is in your sudo or sudo file. There's a lot of those things that are in there. Now, is larger scale IAM type stuff in there? No, it's not going to be in there. But again, arguably, when you're setting up the basics, I don't think that's your first step. I think that's another thing that belongs at layer 2 or layer 3 of that foundation. It's critical. It's something you want to deploy. But if you're looking at, your budget and you're saying, here's what I can afford, what are the minimum things that I need to do, making sure that you have something that's tracking identity across everywhere, I don't think is that first step that you need to take.
Yeah, no, and I would agree with that for the first step. I think that, and this kind of why I asked you if secure configuration management, SCM, included pieces on identity, which I'm going to hold you to your first answer. You said no, it didn't. Here now you're kind of putting some basics in there, but for me, it's those ones the ones you can start with that set you up really well. Vulnerability management, configuration management, you need to revisit those kind of really periodically and frequently. I'm not saying you don't need to revisit your identity, but you can do a lot of that stuff up front, kind of shift it left or shift it down, as they say in security. So I'm not conceding on identity as being a core part. I'm not going to put that as the first Lego brick. I think that should be something that you keep account from the beginning.
We'll agree to disagree on that one.
And that's the beauty of the art of security. We don't have to have the exact same results. If science is repeatable and measurable and predictable, art isn't always. But I think we've demonstrated that today in our differences of opinion. There's probably no right way to kind of start with the basics of cybersecurity. Just make sure you do some cyber hygiene. Sorry, not cybersecurity. Make sure you do some cyber hygiene. Start with the basics and build your Lego tower security strategy from there. Any final advice for the listeners at home?
Am I allowed to say ignore everything Josh said and just listen to me? Is that valid advice?
Oh, we have to get more aggressive. I think I've been a bit friendly today, then, giving him too much. But hey, it's all in the name of cyber resilience. If you want to be hygienic and you want to be resistant to lots of stuff, but actually when you do get ill, you've got really shiny teeth and your insides are falling out. But if you want to be able to catch an illness early and respond to it and get better and back up and running and still brush your teeth, you notice mine was an add-on to yours. I didn't have to take anything out or maybe replace integrity monitoring. But hey, monitoring is the core bit there. So I think there's more we agree on than maybe we disagreed on, but the disagreements are the fun parts to battle on. So thank you very much, Tyler.
Agreed completely. Thank you.